Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Minister, for being here today, and to all of your officials who are present and who will be taking questions after your appearance. While the radical extremist Environment Minister quoted an anti-energy activist group called Environmental Defence in the House of Commons about emissions reductions in Canada, I'm just going to focus on your government's actual federal national inventory report on emissions and ask you some questions about whether or not the carbon tax is actually worth the cost, since it is not reducing Canada's emissions to date. The fact is, of course, Canada has missed every single one of your government's emissions reductions targets, despite your increase of the carbon tax every year since you've implemented it. And Canadians know that emissions have increased each one of those years, except for during 2020, when governments locked Canadians down and the economy was severely damaged by those restrictions. In 2021, you said 2019 would be the last year of emissions increases in Canada, but just last week, your federal government's national inventory reported that Canada's emissions in 2022 were up from 698 million tonnes in 2021 and 686 million tonnes in 2020. During 2022, they were at 708 million tonnes. So will you just simply admit that your carbon tax is not worth the cost and it's failed to reduce Canada's emissions?
Thank you for the question. I would say a few things to that. I mean, the first is I know that folks on the Conservative side of the House often talk about missing targets, but the only target this government has ever had was the 30% below 2005 levels that we inherited from Prime Minister Harper. That's a 2030 target. We actually have made it more ambitious, so it's 40 to 45%. And there's a milestone that we actually implemented in the Act that went through Parliament that is a 2026 number, and we are fully on track to meet that. So we are on track to meet the targets that we actually have established. In terms of the National Inventory Report, what it shows is Canada actually has reduced emissions by 8% versus the 2005 level. It is on track to achieve the targets for 2030, so we are making good progress on the way there. And it also shows that actually 24 of those megatons in 2030, 79 or 78 of the megatons actually come from the carbon price. So it's almost a third of the reductions come from the carbon price.
But he's talking about something 20 years old.
For not being compelled by your comparison to a number in 2005.
Yeah.
You've been in government for 9 years, so let's just talk about what your claims have been, what your policies are, and what the outcomes have been. What your policy has been was to spike the carbon tax by 25% on April 1st, despite 8 premiers asking you not to, and despite more Canadians unable to feed themselves, house themselves, heat and cool themselves when they're needed. Your response has been your Liberal senators holding up Conservative Bill C-234 that would provide carbon tax exemptions on farmers and farm fuels at exactly a time when Canadian farmers are struggling to be able to produce food and Canadians can't afford to eat.
Ms. Stubbs, can I just pause that thought right there? We have a point of order from Mr. Bruson. Mr.